Good evening. Thank you for coming. I'm Henry Hughes, and I teach literature and writing here at Western. And for 20 years, I've been blessed to have as a wonderful colleague, friend, and fellow poet, David Hargreaves, our featured writer tonight. Sure, let's applaud. People aren't sure what to do at poetry readings. Thank you, Becca. So David is a Pisces, born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. Went to Michigan State and did his master's and PhD in linguistics at the University of Oregon. He's one of the world's experts in Nepal Bhasa, a Sino-Tibetan language spoken by the Newar people of the Kathmandu Valley in Nepal. David has spent a lot of time in Nepal. He did a superb translation of Durgala Shrestha, one of the leading poets in Nepal, and I really recommend this book too. It's a beautiful, beautiful collection. Tonight you're going to see, feel, experience a lot of things from Kathmandu. It's interesting. David visited my class this week, and William, you made a great comment. You were talking about David's poetry kind of mingling the sacred and the ordinary, right? The sacred and the profane. It's so true, because there's all these rich traditions of Hinduism and Buddhism, and there's also just kind of the grime and noise and action of the street. And I think David's work really captures that so beautifully. So we'll look forward to more poems like that tonight. David is a linguist, and many of these poems are informed by the science of language, but also by his sensibilities as a really deep reader and a thinker and a writer. I always find kind of a skepticism about language in David's poetry. Language comes sometimes inability, right, to express who we are. And yet there's absolutely a love for language, a lover's embrace. At one point he says he's reborn, a luscious fern or redwood trunk thrusting skyward. Language is always kind of finding itself in a hope and a new life. I love that about his work. These poems examine life and the perceived self. What is a self, he asks sometimes. I think these poems are very grounded, but sometimes I feel dislocated too. That's a beautiful kind of paradox, a tension that goes on in his work. And they kind of inform us and then confuse us at the same time. And I always ask, how do we know these things? And so I think almost every poem is kind of an epistemological quest in itself. And I love that about his work. David's poetry is also just sounds good. It's rich. The imagery is so luscious. I mean, whether it's like Detroit or Kathmandu or nature. I mean, he's a really good nature poet, an amateur naturalist, a professional birder. This man knows his birds. We were just out fishing a couple weeks ago, and I looked like, I don't even know what it was, maybe an osprey, and David immediately recognized a white-tailed kite. At a distance, we approached, confirmed the sighting. We have some birders here. It was very exciting. And this kind of detail and love for nature also informs his work. This is a poet who's smart, sometimes a smart ass. He's punny, he's humorous, he's also serious and heartbreaking. He's honest about loss and desire and intimacy and joy. There's a real voice here, intelligent and felt. He's such a fine poet. Please welcome David Hargreaves.
Well, that's going to be difficult to live up to. Thank you, Henry. Henry, first of all, is probably the person I should most thank for being up here at all. He has been a friend and a tireless supporter of people just putting it out there, just trying to write whatever you can put together. You try and write it, you get feedback, you just keep at it and keep at it. There's really no other way, and Henry has done that for me. He's done it for students, and I can't thank you enough, Henry. There's quite a few other people I want to thank before I begin. First of all, Paula, my division chair. Oh, she's right up front here. She's been super supportive in getting this running, and I, again, thank you very much. The cover of this book, if there ever was a book to judge by its cover, this is the one, okay? And I have to thank Natalie Laswell for her wonderful art and giving me the permission to use this art on the front. So thank you, Natalie. I don't know who's on the live stream here, but I also want to thank Larry Moore, the publisher of Broadstone Books, who really took a chance. He read my work, said, we're going to give it a go. And he's been also very, very supportive, and I appreciate that. Now, the last thing, since this is live stream, and I'm not quite sure what that means exactly, but it is now roughly, 6 o'clock in Kathmandu right now, is it roughly? All right, so maybe some of my friends would be getting up early. I certainly wouldn't wish that on them, but they may be getting up early to watch this. So I also want to thank the poet Durgalal Shrestha, who has also inspired me. The process of learning Nepal Bhasa and trying to translate his work is really one of the most profound experiences. And again, this book wouldn't exist without him as an inspiration. So again, thank you, Durgalal Ju. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start reading, and the first poem here really is a poem that takes place in Kathmandu. Not all of them will. And there's really not too much background here other than to say the Bagmati River is the main river that flows through Kathmandu. The bridge that I will be crossing is called the Black Bridge because it's black. Back in the 80s when I first was going there, it was the only way to cross the Bagmati River at that time, and it was a footbridge. And it crossed over would be just upstream from some cremation grounds. And so to cross the river at night was scary. It was haunted. It was a haunted place, and my friends would say, no, you don't go home tonight walking along that bridge. You need to stay with us tonight. You don't want to cross that river. All right, so the first poem here then is called No Tongue Can Tell. Crossing the Bagmati River at night, we could see from the Black Bridge fires along the riverfront smell. Cremation, a language of flame without words for tongue or lick. Yet, in translation, we drink smoke from cigarettes as if straws, and moonshine, high poured into shallow clay cups, frothy bubble eyes winking each dawn. Pigeons on my window ledge mumbled love, while an old man opened a different window, ratcheted up his morning phlegm, gobbed into the courtyard 3 floors down, scattering the chickens. Do you wonder, as I do, is all this connected? Taxi horns and the peal of a temple bell. Do you wonder, is anything not? Let's see here. So I don't know, who knows who's watching this, but I also shout out to my good friend Cece Ford, who sent me, she's also a linguist, and she sent me an article on the phonetics of poet speak. And there's a certain kind of earnest voice that goes with poets. So I'm trying not to do that. There's another voice that goes with poetry is when you get done with each poem, there's a sigh. Okay, so we're all together on trying to avoid that as much as possible. Okay. Yep, there, you just did it. Okay. This room, this fishbowl of a room, it reminds me of a poem that I wrote, and it's called The Library Window, but this could just as well be the window here. The epigraph is a quote by the Argentinian poet Borges, who I have to say, when I was an undergraduate at Michigan State, one of my literature teachers, I only took one actual literature class, and he said, there's this guy, Borges, who's going to come and speak, and you need to go. So it turns out that one of his translators was in the Spanish department at Michigan State. So at that point, Borges was blind, and they brought him out onto the stage, and at that point, being an undergraduate, French intellectuals were cool, right? Deconstruction was cool. Existentialism was cool. Emerson, Whitman, Americans, totally uninteresting to undergraduates. Okay. But then Borges gets up and quotes from memory passages from Emerson and Whitman that just were absolutely, it just brought tears to my eyes. Absolutely gorgeous. So, I suppose you could say that was one of those moments where you just realize the power of literature. So the quote from Borges here is from his famous short story, and the quote here is, "Nonsense is normal in the library." We all were fretting, will the drought break before the ferns on the boulevard turn brittle brown and then, like lepers, lose their fingers? So it made sense when clouds coaxed in from the ocean let down. We didn't mind the parking lot drizzle, the rainbow oil slicks surrounding the coffee kiosk, painted pumpkin and lime, so long as the cars still idled in line for lattes and Americanos. But our elders, who knew their weather, furrowed their brows, noting how dusty Main Street seemed, no longer clogged with farm machinery, no muscular tractors, no pesticide sprayers with long-armed nozzles folded like wings. No more hay rigs holding up traffic, annoying the hybrids and SUVs already late for couples counseling. Yet, not until the bohemian waxwings gathered like poets in ash trees, thirsting to gorge on the last orange berries, get garrulous drunk, and fly smack dab into the library window, did we admit the heat was news that's staying news. As Henry mentioned, I do enjoy birds. It's annoying if too many birds get in your poems, but there's going to be a few here. This particular poem is a couple of ideas I want to sort of get on the table before I start to read the poem. One is the northern harrier, the male northern harrier has a sort of is gray, looks very much from an unschooled eye like a white-tailed kite. But in fact, it's not. All right. So this, you have to sort of picture the northern harrier. And then maybe a few other notes here. Linnaeus, I'm going to refer to, of course, is this Swedish biologist who founded the taxonomy system for what we use now. And then we all know Darwin. Okay, and finally, the Bible of bird watching from the good old days was Roger Tory Peterson, who sort of has been usurped by newer authors. So the adult males are grayish above with a dark trailing edge on the wing, and that's the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's description of the northern harrier. So it turns out, I'm attracted to wetlands not just for the beauty of Linnaeus and Darwin's legalese, but for the miles of ponderous mire, cattail flowers in various stages of fray like my brainwaves of wispy cotton drifting among the chatter of red-winged blackbirds past oasis of memory, duckweed, pond lily, thermonade, nupfar, since you asked. I'm drawn to wetlands not just for the gist between the lines of sedge and reed thickets, bitterns, galumph, or wren's territorial prattle, but for the sacred weekend in May when grosbeaks lollygag trill glissandos through Mother's Day, preaching from an ash grove truth universal as pollen, reminding me, call Mom. She knew the Latin names for all the birds, but now she's forgotten even mine. Still, the words in the Gospel of Peterson tell me northern harrier, Circus hudsonius, my avatar, hunting low over the marsh, still carries within an insatiable want, third eye scanning my inner life for the slightest sign of voles. See here. This is tremendously rewarding. So again, I want to thank you all for coming here. I'm not done yet, but I'm just looking out. I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces. The entire linguistics department is here, which I can't thank you all enough for coming. It's really good to see everybody. So we're having some weather events taking place over the last couple months, and a lot of them coming from the ocean. So I thought an ocean poem might be a good one. And this poem will also be an entryway into a series of other poems. And this is called Dream Vista. The Pacific swells and rolls unhurried, sidling up to a jagged cliff along the coastline, then exhales. Harmonic wave oscillation, oceanographers love to say. Yet, were the sea still a god, we'd say it slumbers. ebb and flow, each high followed by a low trough exposing mollusk-crusted fissures, cracks recessed deep into crevices teeming with shifty-eyed marine lowlife, clammed up, clinging to rocks, the usual riffraff of my unconscious. So, let's explore my unconscious, shall we? At Michigan State, at the time, the psychology department had two schools, and they hated each other. There were the Freudians and the behaviorists, and that was psychology at the time. That's all there's no cognitive psychology. There was nothing. And so you pretty much had to choose sides if you were going to be in it. And so I didn't choose, and I didn't become a psychology major, though I might have. So what I wanted, I used to dream of being ravished, decomposed into smutty loam, then reborn, a luscious fern or redwood trunk thrusting skyward above the arms of maple saplings, praying to what little light chaos allotted. What I got instead, a quota of koi and lily pads floating on duckweed-sedated ponds, appetite tame as houseplants hung from macrame parachutes dropped onto sweater vest lawns with growing high hedges. All I do now is sit and sip wine beside the new fountain while the old fountain pens sign the treaty, the latest Versailles concession to the bonsai garden path, so zen clean-shaven, so well pruned, yet always, always, always thirsty. Now, if you've ever been over to the South Jetty in Newport, there's the drive that goes up there, and there's a whole bevy. I'm embarrassed to admit I don't know the actual collective noun for gulls, if anyone wants to share, but there's a flock, which seems not a very interesting word for the most part, but lots of gulls, and they love to be fed. And so this sort of starts to move from that experience. The epigraph here is from an Irish poet by the name of Nuala Ní Gomihil, and the line goes, "When you sailed away, my goodbyes were the gulls in your wake." They say Gull Woman used to mix men, sazeracs, rye with bitters, and serve them peanuts. She may even have once or twice swallowed some sad husband's last call. But that's all over. Since that night, her eyes, tear-smeared in the bar mirror, caught a glimpse of her own divinity and cracked the code programming her to serve those greedy seabirds crying for crumbs. Nowadays, while the dawn mist burns and distantly a Giacometti and waiters cast into the surf, the gulls flock the opposite way, tracking the shoreline through the haze to throng above her, hovering on her every word for Cheetos. Her ankles bathed in ocean waves. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hand raised, she calls her children, all by the same name. So I'm stretching out here a little bit on some of the poems. So this poem is called, apologies to the Sanskritists in the room, Gurdra Kurta. Gurdra Kurta. Okay, I'll translate for you. Vulture Peak, or better yet, Buzzard Butte, where the Buddha turned the second wheel of law, the self is an illusion. Damn confusing. Try to picture yourself as a hollow gourd carved with a jack-o'-lantern's grimace, seeds scooped out, salted, baked into a snack, the rest pulped into pie. Picture light through the holes you call eyes. Picture your candle melted flat, soon a frozen puddle of wax. Picture fuzzy, blue-gray mold, the rot as your bankrupt shell corporation collapses. And yet your monkey brain chitters on, all through lunch with your reptile brain and voluptuous Tara, who points to the rusty lettuce on your plate, declaring, "Don't be a baby. That salad is sad." Okay, so, see, I think I have next two poems will reference growing up. I didn't technically grow up in Detroit. I was born in Detroit, and I grew up in Royal Oak, which was a borderline suburb. My mom grew up on 8 Mile Road in Woodward Avenue, which Woodward is the main line that goes right through the Detroit out to the suburbs. 8 Mile is the famous 8 Mile of Eminem. For those of you who know who he is. Okay. All right. We're kind of dividing by generations here. So, okay. So there's two references here. One is to Jimmy Hoffa, famous Detroiter. If you've seen the Scorsese's movie, The Irishman, there's about the Jimmy Hoffa. It turns out that the restaurant that he disappeared from, just 1 year before, I had gone there on my senior prom with a date. So it's a real place. It's a real place. The second thing is that there's a term that may or may not be familiar, and it's the term bodhisattva. So in Buddhist practice, the bodhisattva is the name for the person who, having the opportunity to achieve enlightenment, instead of absolving themselves into the absolute, they return in order to, out of compassion, in order to help others achieve their own mastery through the practices of Buddhism. So the term is bodhisattva. Call before you dig. This is a cautionary tale of cryptic glyphs in day-glow orange scrawled across my lawn, blue along the sidewalk, a story of hidden gas line, cables, all things buried, of how I've spent my life afraid to dig, denying a taste for dirt, a lust to root in rich black clay and feel it ooze between my toes, and yet all the while, wallowphobic, praying to remain unsoiled. No wonder, when the snow fell, I became self-interred, confined to solitary, listening to inside voices beneath the covers of my favorite goose-down comforter, with all the other smothered bodies found dug up, wristbone relic of a bodhisattva wearing Jimmy Hoffa's handcuffs. Call before you dig. So the second poem that references Detroit here is appropriate because today is Veterans Day, and there will be a reference in here to issues that certainly all veterans would contend with, and it doesn't matter really what your feeling is about whatever war is being fought. The veterans themselves deserve this kind of recognition and appreciation. So go ahead and say that and read you the poem, and it's called Learning Curve. When I found out screech owls don't, actually, they whistle and trill desire and defense, I cringed. Turns out it was a barn owl screeching from its hole in a sycamore all night that reminded me of hearing my girlfriend's pleasure through the wall next door, while I munched cold pizza with my dealer, Rachel, from across the hall and tried not to stare at her shriveled arm or mispronounce thalidomide, asking nonchalant. I didn't expect she'd let me in or call me out on just how cruelly everyone gawked when she dropped her cafeteria tray, tater tots rolling across the tiles, or how cruel we all have been, she said, to let that fucker Johnson call up more troops for his dirty war. Even crueler, the cute lifeguard never returned home to our city pool. He was always kind to me, she said. It's always kids like him, whose dad worked the line at Ford River Rouge, stood with the union, got beat up by the company thugs. Dense as I am, I was unaware it was so late when she leaned her cheek on my shoulder, exhaled a smoky fucking A, and passed me back the bong, asking, did you know him? All right, this next poem should be recognizable. It's called Elegy for an Election. I think everything should be pretty clear, except perhaps the concept of the Mercator projection is a type of projection in geography. Gee, if we had a department, wouldn't that be nice? When you take an orange globe, or an orange or a globe, and you peel it into one piece and you put it on the wall, instead of having it distorted like a flat, you have this certain kind of shape. So it's called a Mercator projection. I had to look it up too. Okay. Elegy for an election. We've nothing left but the rind of ourselves, peeled from the whole, paired like an orange globe. A Mercator projection, our future, pinned to the classroom wall by alien cartographers 2 months ago. When the polar axis wobbled away from true north, when the sky ignited screensaver colors, when the otherworldly spacecraft landed, as I was raising her cusp to my lips, her back arching, gasping, pulling my hair, and then we watched TV like the rest. Us and the billions, Earth, the networks called it early. Now a mere crossroad midden where they've come to bury their afterbirth, dump their trash, and advertise the rapture. How to commemorate our own apocalypse, how to observe. We sit in orange Naugahyde chairs playing gin rummy in a double wide. I'm so happy I chain smoke cools, sip 7 and 7. Our eyes gaze up, tracking the ceiling fan strobe illusion, shadows paddling backward. Even the cat's confused, swatting at the empty air. Okay, so we've already referenced geography. It's time to reference philosophy, another department which, who can say? But I do know that I am going to misquote Heraclitus. I've already been informed that I'm doing so. I don't care. I'm not actually but Heraclitus is famous, of course, for you can never step in the same river twice. It's a cliche that gets trotted around quite a bit. It may or may not be what he actually said, or he might have meant something very different. That's okay. This is postmodern times. We can interpret the text however we want. Okay. And this is called Step in the Same River Twice. Heraclitus says we can't, but then again, he's never been to Utah. He could never understand how two geeks could meet through math inside the curly brackets, both wanting to follow the order of operations, and how at dinner we'd discover a scatterplot of poppy seeds on a white tablecloth and scribble together on a Sazerac-stained napkin the formula for why not. Leave Salt Lake, rent a Prius, drive due west, and doing 85, calculate the path of a hawk lifted off from the earth, exploding on our grill. He couldn't predict how a gravel truck rattles past, shooting pebbles, how our windshield wisecracks about the sky, although he should have seen at midnight how oncoming brights from a bully pickup rushing drunk towards us cried, "Repent, repent." Luckily, a jerk of the wheel saves us onto the shoulder, where we weep, hug, kiss, fuck under the hatchback, fall asleep. I'm certain he never dreamed of an Oregon high desert sunrise or watched the John Day River snuggle a cliff, curl into a pool across from where we stand together on a pebble shore. We sacrifice our bacon fat from the skillet to the god of fire, say a prayer, then step, goosebump naked, clasping hands, two souls in the same river once, as the current, so revered by the esteemed philosopher, struggles to grasp the simple idea of feet. Okay, so I think I'm going to have time. This is a poem that actually in Henry's poetry class, Henry asked me to read it, and they read it, and they did a fantastic job reading it, and it was flattering, and it was very flattering to have students look at it, read a poem so closely. So I'm going to go ahead and read that one, and then I've just got a couple more, and we'll call it, let me find this one, okay. So the concept here, the title of the poem is Samsara, which is another term. Originally from the Sanskrit, it means simply to wander. It means simply to wander around. Eventually, in Buddhist practice in particular, it comes to mean the cycle of birth and rebirth through mundane life. As we know, life is mostly painful. Okay, and then you struggle and struggle and struggle, and you seek release, and then the next thing you know, you're reborn into the same struggle again, over and over and over again. That form of wandering is what in Buddhist practice is called samsara. So the name of this poem is Samsara. The second thing I should add is I'm going to tell you a brief little story here, and it involves the god Shiva and his wife Parvati. They had a child, and the child's name was Ganesh. So Shiva went out one day, leaving the house, and went out to do whatever gods do when they leave the house and go to work. Wandered around and came back many years later and saw this very beautiful boy at his house, and his mother was bestowing attentions on this beautiful boy. So Shiva went into a jealous rage and cut the boy's head off. Of course, it turns out, as Freud would have predicted, it's his son. So Parvati says, you're a god, you got to do something about this. And he seeks other gods, because there's actually other gods that are more powerful than him when you do things like that. And they said, okay, we'll fix it, but under one condition. You can only restore him to the first animal that you see coming along, which turns out to be an elephant. So you may recognize the very famous and popular Hindu deity Ganesh. In Kathmandu, virtually every street corner has got a sculpture that represents Ganesh. He is a beloved deity for all kinds of reasons. So samsara. In the epigraph here, which I already talked about with Sanskrit, there's one more from Stephen Crane, American writer, and it goes like this: I saw a man pursuing the horizon. Eternal as a Netflix series, end and beginning, another season. Here's the recap. Shaken awake to monsoon lightning in a thunder-tossed bed, an earthquake rattling tiles on the temple roof, rain-flooded streets conceal a dangerous crack in the cobblestone. Another inkling of me ago, a girl, maroon school uniformed, riding her bike past the temple, tire striking the hidden gap, untruing spokes, misshaping the wheel. Clouds gather my wits. The sun, a memory on my face. A jet-haired woman in a red sari comes with a tray of yogurt, flowers, vermilion powder, kneels at my stone-sculptured feet to place an offering. For me, the boy whose head, lopped off by his jealous father, Lord Shiva, got reborn as an elephant. Another case of identity theft, another way of being misled, and always this craving, this thirst for release, to let go the world seen through green eyes, me, taut smile, hay bale blonde, meth-rung carny at the county fair, leveraging the tilt-a-whirl. My skin itches wearing this saffron robe. Okay, so we'll just do a couple more poems here. We're going to, this one I think I should send out to Paula. She's the one who has named this poem the grilled cheese poem. So that's the only reference. You'll find a reference to grilled cheese sandwiches in here. Okay. And this, again, for the philosophers in the house, the epigraph here comes from Wittgenstein, and it's from the Blue and Brown books, and he asks us, what is the difference between searching for a word in memory and searching for a friend in the park? Let us attack the question first by asking the slide rule how a worker feels getting laid off. Then ask the red nectar feeder what it thinks about hummingbirds choosing smack over fuchsia. Now translate this into emoji just to see how meaning gets lost, traded off for 68 Tigers baseball cards. Some of us explode at the thought, act out in daycare, throw letter blocks. Some of us get stoned behind the wheel until an unmarked song comes along on the radio, pulls us over, catches us weeping, we fess up. sputtering like summer sprinklers, trying to endure the starling's jeer from a dead oak, trusting the night shift to clean up the mess. It's so easy to misconstrue is no excuse. In any case, hey, you're quite the grilled cheese sandwich, was never a compliment, more like a threat. Even Humpty Dumpty knows he's liable to take home the wrong pair of pants from the cleaner. I forgot to tell you the name of that poem. It's Ordinary Language. Okay. So two more poems here. This one is the last one in the book, and it's also, and then I'm going to go back to the title, the poem from which the title is taken. And this was actually the very first poem I published, and it involved, it was a meditation really on a word I just couldn't figure out how to translate. And it's called Language Lesson. Due north of sweet mango summer's slippery pulp between the teeth, or frothy chia in fog-bound winter, steaming cardamom and clove, far east of bitter greens, garlic and pouty little fruit, omelet in hot and sour soup, west of the fire, flesh from the butcher, fresh green chili fried with fingerfuls of pounded rice flakes and grandma's moonshine, Ayla, poured high from a narrow spout, bubble eyes splashing in a shallow clay cup. South of the salt trade Buddha's footfalls, ancient paths along the paddy where anklets jangle gracefully past tender shoots, impatient for the monsoon to mount the Himalayas. There's a place on the tongue. Chew slowly, savor, a moment English cannot reach. So the last poem I'm going to read is, it's called The Rule of Threes. And again, just the rule of threes is a term that's used, you got three little pigs, three blind mice, three wishes. Every folktale basically in the world revolves around threes in some kind of order or sense. And so this is sometimes called the rule of threes. A dream receding, part one. A dream receding leaves behind a tideline rack of stranded driftwood, shell and pebble surf-rolled, randomized, let go a shoreline swath of stochastic beauty. Beach detritus arrayed in bell curves, plotting the chance of a lifetime, the chance of my brother drowning, the chance of my wife's cancer. Part two. A dream of more pebbles, raked in their bed by the braided waters of a stream where salmon spawn out, rot in shallows, where collared doves coo Unitarian hymns above quiet pools, where lazy eddies swirl and shades drift between trees. Part three. A dream of black hoods on sapphire jays, flocking in the tops of fir trees, my tutelary deities scolding. They all know me as I am, carried along by the current, inner tube leaking like an old dictionary, running out of words for afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was great reading. We have an opportunity for questions, and I can deliver you the mic. Paula, do you have a question?
No, I want to take a picture of the group.
Okay. So please look your best. Paula will be photographing you. She's a wonderful activist for art and culture here at Western. Questions, anyone? I'm sure there's some questions out there. You're wondering about something. Scott, you must be wondering about something. You're puzzled.
I'm good for right now. I'll try to think of how to articulate the question as I'm asking it. But so one of the interesting things I hear and see across your poems is maybe a certain relation between form and force, whether it's as we described earlier, this sort of blending of a sacredness of a location with with the kind of daily movement as well with it, or if it's the sort of science of birds and the environment, but not really contrasted to the beauty and life of it in some romantic way, but there's still some interesting relationship, a gap between these two things, but that isn't really fully a gap, right? A gap, but also some sort of intrinsic relation. Same thing with your unconscious in the poems and this detailed architecture that's connected to somehow. Could you kind of reflect on that?
Yeah, help me understand what the gap is between form and energy. I wasn't quite sure I'm tracking.
Yeah,
that.
maybe that's a way of putting it.
Okay.
Okay, I'm addressing a motif I'm seeing
I see,
and asking you to just speak on it, whether as the writer or even distanced as a critic linguist.
I appreciate the question. It's actually takes me to a place I hadn't intended to go. But if I were to talk in terms of maybe I wouldn't call it my philosophy, but my experience of Buddhism and Hinduism as practiced, not as esoteric texts, but as practiced in the actual lives of the people I've known over the years in Nepal. One of the things I notice is that I've continually experienced is that it's not a textual experience, it's an experience of daily ritual practices, mundane as could be. Every day, someone going and offering flowers or to one of the deities, and then maybe every month doing it a different, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, it's ritual, it's mundane, it's ordinary, but at the same time, it carries with it this understanding that that everything is temporary, that the self is a temporary entity, that there's really no such thing as identity. There's just simply the movement. Maybe that's the sense of force you're describing, a kind of movement through a process of always becoming. And this is perhaps where the notion of a cycle, they're running out of words for afterwards. In fact, there's always an afterwards. It just repeats again, perhaps. I'm really reluctant to commit myself to an ontology here or any kind of metaphysics. But it's more to try and express somehow what I've come to feel about that sense of impermanence, I suppose. And maybe the gap is the concept of impermanence between, I'm not sure, but that, you asked me to go there. So I appreciate, Ryan, I very much appreciate the question. It's thoughtful in close readings. I really do appreciate that.
As a birder, David is not a checklist kind of guy. He's not like kind of a statistical, and you've talked about that, the life list, and I saw this today. It's more about the experience. Would you agree? It's very much about that. Mm-hmm. So again, I think as a linguist too, the science of language, I think you do well to move against that into a kind of felt experience, language experience, which writers have to. Yeah. But it must be, I think you're perceiving a struggle between these two worlds, these two paradigms, which I think you navigate beautifully.
I don't feel the struggle, but
I feel the struggle, man.
No, I feel the struggle, and I forgot to thank Dennis Eddings, former chair of the English department, was wise enough to hire me 20 odd years ago, right. And talk about
he's having second thoughts.
Yeah,
now.
Yeah, he is having second. But the struggle that I do experience is actually an academic or an institutional one. The struggle between the way in which language is represented in linguistics as a discipline, as an empirical science, as part of a way of approaching, as opposed to, let's say, the poetry and the humanities and art and other. And I don't feel those as being distinct any more than, let's say, studying music theory is incompatible with being a musician, or studying color theory is incompatible with being an artist. And yet, institutionally, there's always this force to push those things apart.
That's interesting. And here in English studies, they're very much integrated.
We have worked, and I should thank my colleagues in linguistics. They have worked very hard to try and make ourselves part of the larger story.
Other questions, comments? Please introduce yourself.
I'm Ryan. I'm another Ryan asking a question. I'm curious about the mood in the poems that you've just read, because they're serious, a lot of them, but also there's a way in which your voice in the poem is I don't want to say ironic, or it's not like laugh out loud funny. I wouldn't describe it as mirthful or humorous, right? But there's a way in which some of the poems shift back and forth between something that's more serious and something that's an observation that's a little bit lighter. Have you done that on purpose? Am I just reading that into them? Is that in there? What do you?
Again, this is a great question. It's flattering to have people read your stuff closely and ask these questions. I think maybe the way to approach that is to make the observation that other people, my closest friends, have made to me, that sometimes they don't know when I'm joking or being serious, that I have a kind of ironic, irony, sarcasm. I'm not sure. One friend described it as sardonic, but then when I looked it up, that's basically the description of the grim smile of a corpse. Yeah. And I thought that is probably not a compliment if you're describing my poems as sardonic. But I feel that. I feel like it's both deadly serious and also just light and funny and maybe, a distance, I don't know. It's a real thing, though. I think you're right, and I don't know how to describe it.
Thank you. How did he do with the Heraclitus? We have a living philosopher here.
He's good. I mean, Heraclitus has been misrepresented in that exact way for thousands of years.
So within the 1,000-year period, you feel he's okay? All right. That's good to know that. Other questions, comments? Yes?
I'm Kit. I'm a student here, and I really like writing poetry. And I guess I just wanted to know maybe when you felt like you started getting serious about poetry, and when and where you like to do your writing.
Great question. The seriousness about poetry really came as I was starting the translation project, and I was talking to Henry's class earlier. As I was translating, I realized I have to figure out how Durgalal's voice sounds if he were writing in English. And in Nepal, most of the translations of his poetry had been by very fluent, educated Nepalis who also spoke English very well, but they wrote as if they were Victorians. And so, because that was the colonial legacy of South Asia, the English there. And so I had to figure out how to write in a colloquial American English, because his poetry is colloquial. It's very earthy, and it's also abstract and imagist and all kinds of things, but it's also very earthy from the point of view of the native speakers. So I just read massively, and that was my advice to the class, is just read everything you can get your hands on outside of the anthologies that you're given. Yes, the anthologies, but there's a lot of poets that are left out of the anthologies that ought to be there. There's a lot of poets that are in there and they don't speak to me, at least. I'm not going to say, and for all kinds of reasons that people are excluded. So just reading contemporary journals, just getting a feel for all the different voices that are out there, I think really got me serious about trying to find that place. My own writing practice. Over time, I found mornings. It used to be, and this sounds terrible. I hate when older men say, well, back in the day, it's like I could stay up till 1 o'clock, or something. I mean, I used to do that and stay up and, you'd get all jazzed and you'd write, but no longer. So instead, I wake up and I've got a fresh, clean brain for 2-3 hours, and that's when my best writing takes place. Now, there are other occasions when I might just go off, and write some real nonsense, but then the next day you got to clean it up and look at it. So that's my practice. But reading, and I find that I'll pick up a poet and I'll read and I'll get barely through one poem, and boom, all of a sudden I've got tons of ideas. And it's not copying, it's just being, their language now is sort of unlocked this sort of part of my brain that I wanted to have access to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good. Yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
And I'm Paula. Communication, humanities. So this is not a terribly erudite question, but when I listen to your poetry, I have the sense that there's this other entire story underneath it, this layer. And so I'm wondering, in your process, do you have that story, and then as you write your poetry, you take this poignant statement and this turn of the narrative? I mean, is that how you do it? I mean, I literally really don't know, but I was thinking with every poem, I was like, that I can almost see the story behind it.
Yeah.
And I wonder, does that come first?
I don't know. I really don't know. I really don't know how. I mean, I think it's fair to say that every poem that I've ever written, at least, is really an artifact of ultimately a crafting. You know, you get ideas and you've got stuff going on and you're really working to try. But in the end, it's not just I woke up and had a moment and now this poem shows up on the page. And sometimes you'll work on a stanza or two and it kind of fails. And then you put it away and then all of a sudden some other piece will say, well, I could put these two together. And I can find a way of linking them in some way. Now a new story is started. And so it's really sometimes very haphazard. I don't think hardly any of these poems started as I have an idea and it's going to go from here to there.
Sure.
And I'm a lot of my writing is driven by sound. I just love the sound of certain movements, and so I just hear something, a phrase or an oddball comment somewhere, and then that gives me
Cheese sandwich.
grilled cheese sandwich. Yeah.
Thank you.
But I mean, grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup it's one of the favorite comfort foods of all time. So there you go.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Oh, yes.
Josiah. Josiah here is also trying to master the bridge between linguistics and poetry, so I'm sympathetic.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering I know you read a bunch of poetry. I was wondering if you have any poets that you want to have a shout out to that were really inspirations, not just for this book of poetry, but wanting to read poetry in general. That was the first question. And the second question, I wonder, in your process of writing poems, like in your first poem, it seemed like it was imagery driven, where that was the first thing that kind of imprints your mind, and then you kind of, there maybe built a message or something else off of that. But then in some of your poems, it seemed like it was emotionally driven. Like there was one about the bird. I think that was my favorite one, where you're talking about birds and how it recalls that you should give your mom a call about the Latin names. I wonder what's your process? Do you sometimes take like an emotional theme or quality and then you want to surround the imagery around that? Or do you start with the imagery and then inject that with a certain emotion or imbue it with a certain idea that you want to present?
Okay, can I answer the first question first?
Yeah, sure.
There are many, many great poets out there, and contemporary. There's so many modern poets out there writing, and so many new voices out there from previously unheard voices, and it's really important to keep out there. So there's lots of those voices. But in fact, I'd go back farther. There are two poets that are really modernist poets from the 20s, 10s, 20s, 30s that don't get highly represented in anthologies. And one of them is the woman Mina Loy, who was a surrealist poet, hung around with all the Dadaists, and was just a wild, crazy, liberated woman who wrote the most interesting, and it's poetry that still holds up today among all the surrealist and imagist poets. I just think she's terrific. She's very hard to make sense of, so you just go with it. All right, so Mina Loy. The second is actually almost the opposite, and he was a contemporary of T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound and so on, is Conrad Aiken. And he wrote volumes and volumes of really bad poetry. But there are some places where his stuff is as beautiful and brilliant as any of the modernists. And Harold Bloom did a volume of Conrad Aiken's poetry and went through and found the best stuff of his. And if you want to hear language sing, he's just one of the, and it's the kind of thing where I wouldn't come across him if I hadn't wandered through alleyways outside of the anthologies. And the same with Mina Loy. She gets a shout out once in a while, and she's now being understood more and more. But those two, if I were to rewrite the anthologies, they'd be at the top, and Ezra Pound can go off and do his fascist radio broadcasts, and I really wouldn't miss him much at all. No, but there we go. Okay, sorry. Thanks, great question.
And the second answer?
Oh, what was, okay, the second one, the process again.
Image or sound driven?
Or emotion, image
Yeah.
driven or emotion and idea driven, that you have something on your heart?
I think I find myself stumbling across emotional passages as opposed to setting out to write an emotional poem. I basically can't write a poem. I can't sit down and say, God, I really feel this is really upsetting, or this memory. It sounds cliched and sounds off. And there's, the genre of the occasional poem where you're going to, the presidential, inauguration, and now you have to write a poem about it. I couldn't imagine how to do that because it would just sound so artificial. Instead, I just start with sounds and images and things that are really sort of running around and are interesting and beautiful. And of course, I'm going to end up bumping into things that I feel emotionally, and they're going to remind me of this. And then that's a good, that's a good energy to work with once you get there. But I certainly never start there. I wouldn't be able to. Oh, Chloe?
Thanks, David.
Yes.
So I feel like your poetry especially is very playful in part, and I know that you kind of describe yourself as you kind of believe in a descriptive someone who studies language in a descriptive way. Am I right?
Yes.
Rather
yeah,
than
I would
kind
say,
of,
yeah.
I'm very much in your translation pushing against those terrible British translations.
Oops, sorry.
So I know I love it, but I'm just wondering. I kind of see a lot of growth there, right, in language, and I wonder what happens in your heart when that growth and playfulness meets the nature that you are so fond of, and you study and you see it in great decline. And how do you keep that kind of playfulness and language alive when you meet degradation of that sort?
Yeah. There's a couple of poems that I have written that are not playful in that sense, and they go to those places. And yeah, it's getting harder and harder to write nature poems, or to have nature in a poem at all, or to allow nature to speak for you or about you in all of those ways that we're used to. It's true. I mean, you're absolutely right, and I wouldn't want to say that you shouldn't write or can't write if whatever it is that you're feeling. But I know what you're saying, and the same is true for any topic that you write on can be very quickly viewed, especially if you're an older white man. It's pretty hard not to write poetry about old white men when you're an old white man. So it's genuinely difficult, and it's a struggle. And certainly you want to make sure that there are as many voices besides yours that are out there in circulation. But on the other hand, I'm still going to write. I'm going to write what I feel, and I'm going to just go there. I can't go there, and there's nothing less appealing than writing didactic poetry just for the sake of, let's say, having a point to make. That never works. But often you will arrive there if you keep writing. But yeah, I think every modern poet or contemporary poet struggles right now with what it means to be writing poetry in this age. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe. So then the act of writing itself is what just kind of keeps us going forward.
Hopefully.
Thank you very much, and a wonderful evening, David Hargreaves.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thank you.